You were talking about reports. Can you show us a report? What you get out of the system?
Sure. You can show them that.
Usually we have our reports sent via email. I have to log into my account to show that to you.
Well, but you can also show them through here. It's the same thing that the UI actually spits out, I believe. If you go to status, right? Show them yeah. So it will not only show you in-process builds, but also show you completed builds. If we see a completed build, right now it'll just be a bunch of errors, but you could look at one of the builds that's actually green from like the 13th of May, I believe. So it will tell you which tests executed, how long that took, and if it does fail, it'll give you a Python stack trace or whatever language you've written it in. Quite verbose.
Yeah, there is.
And actually a lot of this is not, so most of this is not Hudson. Hudson doesn't have specific built-in functions to my knowledge. A lot of this is output that we've written into the test cases themselves to raise exceptions and do print statements and debug output and things like that. So you can tweak it as needed. But yeah, we do get emails, so if a developer checks in a test that breaks our build, we will get email, as soon as that build finishes, pretty much.
Okay. Anyway, total time to run for a build.
Currently, we're finishing a smoke test suite, which we should have finished a few weeks ago, but it's about 26 minutes.
Okay, and all the functional tests would take?
Unknown. We have a test. So we have a test that actually searches every persona on the website, and I believe that one takes upwards of 50 minutes or something like that. So the good thing about the way we've written our tests is we've parameterized them, so you can actually pass the type of test that you want to run. So you can say, I want this test to run a smoke test, I want this test to run a basic functionality or a full functionality. And then that will change the number of options and parameters passed to the test. And it'll know, okay, I only want to grab 5 personas or 10 add-ons versus 50 versus the complete set.
And how many total tests are you running? Like if you were in the smoke test, for example, that setup?
I think our smoke test is around 20 or so?
Okay, so 26 minutes for 20 tests? Is that accurate? Okay. Are you running, let me see here. Are you actively trying to get rid of XPath in your locators?
Jury's still out on that, I think. Some of us prefer CSS locators, and some of us prefer XPath. There are pros and cons to both. We do have a function called, is it AMO locators, which is basically just a bunch of stored reusable XPaths for every element on the add-ons website. And that's a giant file, obviously. And so we will use that in most of our functions. Some of us haven't gotten there yet, and we're still learning that syntax. So I think in the end, we'll probably move maybe towards CSS, but I'm not sure at this point.
Okay, and final, to give other people a chance here, why VMs and how is your grid stability?
Well, we have Firefox runs on all platforms, right? And we need to actually run on those platforms. And the best way to actually run on those platforms is to actually have VMs.
As in opposed to on a machine that's got a full install of?
Well, it's also resources.
Part of this is a Mozilla DNA/IT thing. So the IT team has standardized support for virtual machines, and we use VMware Fusion primarily. We have, God knows, I think we have like upwards of like a couple hundred machines, Mac Minis. They're used for various things. Not all of them are used for us, obviously. We only use a couple of them, but it's just easier for us to piggyback on what the IT team already supports. And the other thing is you can't legally emulate or run in a virtual machine the Mac OS X itself. So running the other operating systems through VMware Fusion is one of the best things we can do. And the client team has told us for testing Firefox that there are subtle differences, sometimes not so subtle, between running Firefox in a VM versus in a native machine. There's some registry issues or maybe like low-level compiler issues or things like that. But for the web testing, we haven't really seen any problem running in a VM. And it's just easier, right? You can VNC, reboot it.
How does given that you're showing us a lot of builds with several failures since you're adding to the suites or whatever, how does this fit in with your pipeline? If you have a failed build, does it when you're, let's say, pushing code out to production, do you wait for a green build, or if you have a failed build, do you stop check-ins, or how does that work?
So luckily we have a great development team who basically started the move to Django, and we followed suit with our conversion from IDE to Python as well. And they have upwards of 400 unit tests, which, depending on how you define a unit test, can be a lot of coverage or it can be mediocre coverage, but we found it to be pretty good. Right now we're still standardizing on our tests and still trying to figure out the best way to do those tests, but we will not wait for green. Right now we still do a lot of functional testing, so we're not quite there yet, but we do have the framework set up. It's just now a matter of cleaning up the tests now that we've come to sort of the modularization that we need.
You had a nose test, and this is unit test in Python. Do you use both?
We run our tests with nose.
In nose, okay. And you mentioned selectors using CSS and XPath. Why not just IDs?
Well,
Because they change IDs quite a bit.
Okay.
As they add new functionality, we find that IDs are pretty breakable. The other thing is that, I'm sorry, your first question was?
About nose tests versus unit test.
Yeah, so we used to have a folder called smoke test, and then we used to have just a regular Python test folder.
talking about starting nose tests.
The test harness.
Oh, just starting with it? Okay. I was going to say, yeah.
If you go back to the VM, you had a couple RCs started, I think, the
Yeah.
Windows. Why so many?
Because we use all of them all the time.
Okay.
We need that many. That's why.
That many RCs per VMs?
Yeah, when we ran just grid, we actually ran into a lot of, we had to restart the VMs quite a bit, or at least restart the builds quite a bit. We've been pretty stable lately in terms of Selenium itself running through Hudson in the grid.
We're all looking at your code, and so I'm wondering whose code you guys looked at when you were learning all this stuff. Like you mentioned public SVN, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think you're saying that even this test code is open source.
It's all open source. And
Cool.
in fact, we would encourage people with greater prowess than ours to come through and suggest improvements and whatnot. So,
Do any of those people also have material out there in public, in open source repositories that you would suggest that those of us look at for, who are looking for best practices?
I mean, we've Googled a lot for other people's code. We've also sat down with the development team. They use unit test exclusively. They don't really import the Selenium module and do much with Selenium themselves. But in terms of Python, we've got Ian Bicking and we've got Jeff Balog, and we've got quite a few people who are strong in the Python community who give us best practices and who write scripts like check.py that actually go through and take the guidelines from Python and run that against our scripts and try to clean up our code and things like that. But yeah, we've been through so many sort of issues with architecture and things like that we think we're in a good place now, but I'm sure we can always improve.
Sounds like a pretty healthy ecosystem. Thanks.
Yep.
You mentioned trying to increase the coverage. How are you currently measuring your coverage?
We don't have any code coverage, which is bad. Development does. They use Pylint to tell how clean their code is, but they have some other system that actually tells them, execution-wise, how many lines of code they're testing. I'm not sure how to get that, and I don't know if Raymond, if you've looked into that at all, or how we would get that, or if anybody here has an idea. Actually, we'd be open to that as well. Sonar.
For the guy who was talking about best practices, you should just follow PEP8. PEP8's enough.
Yeah, that's what check.py
does.
basically.
Yeah. Well, that's not PEP8 compliant, but okay.
And I should say, none of us knew Python at all before we tried this. Some of us still only know Selenium, some of us know JavaScript, but we're all learning Python or trying to learn Python. So I wouldn't say that's been a huge learning curve, but it's definitely taken us some time to get that right, and we're still not quite there. But But Python is a strong language, so we're really encouraged by it.